Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman.
All right, my friends. So I said yesterday we would be talking about this today. So let's just jump right into it because it's a big topic and a scary one, quite frankly. The question is, does it appear as though we are barreling towards a second violent insurrection sometime in the month of August? Now, let's discuss that. First of all, why are we even talking about August? We're talking about August because the Washington Post and the New York Times and the National Review, a conservative leading outlet, have published articles over the last couple of weeks outlining to different degrees Donald Trump's belief or hope that he will be reinstated as president of the United States sometime in August of this year, meaning in just a couple of months. Now, as you know, and as I know, that is impossible. You and I know that reinstatement is not a process that is part of the American system of government. There is a president, there is a vice president. If for some reason the president is no longer president, the vice president becomes the president. There is a line of succession. None of it includes we go back to the previous guy who lost an election. It doesn't work that way. The next presidential election is November of 2024. Whoever wins will be inaugurated in January of 2025. But that doesn't matter to Donald Trump, and apparently it doesn't matter to millions of his followers around the country who are increasingly convinced, increasingly waiting for their fearless leader to be, quote, reinstated by the time that summer is over. There was a really good post on our subreddit that for some reason was since deleted by the person who posted it. And it asked, potential August insurrection, is it being overlooked? And the subreddit user pointed out they've been hearing from family in rural Missouri. They've been hearing from family in rural Wisconsin. And many of them are, quote, stocking up on ammunition and firearms for what is maybe coming in August. They talk about Trump's supposed generals that he has on his side and their expectation that there's going to be an attempt to take Joe Biden out of the White House and put Trump in sometime during August. And the Post pointed out something that's pretty astute, which is that the public-facing media story has been, Mike Flynn talking about there should be a coup, and Donald Trump continuing to say the election was stolen and we must do these audits, and Trump saying, I will be president again sooner than you think. But to people thinking about that below the surface, there is an incredibly irrational group of people who believe that that is a code directed to them, that they should be ready to take up arms against the government. And sadly, in practice, it may be functioning as such a code. Whether that's what Donald Trump intends or not, it doesn't even matter. In practice, it very well may function as a code in that sense. Our viewer wrote that many of the people that he's talking about aren't hugely visible online, but they are quietly stocking up ammunition, acquiring firearms, and preparing to do the worst if the time should come. They point out that the rhetoric they are seeing on signage in rural Missouri and rural Wisconsin has gotten crazier, about dead Democrats being the only good ones and other violent messages. So the question is whether the possibility of serious violence in August is being overlooked. I believe it's important not to be hyperbolic. I still think the most likely situation is when Trump doesn't become president in August. Not much violence will happen, certainly no big organized violent event, and they'll go and focus on November or the next January or whatever the case may be. That's what I think is the most likely outcome, and they'll put in place some new arbitrary timeline to look forward to. But there is precedent for these violent riots, and the precedent was 5 months ago when on January 6th, Trump riots took place in Washington, D.C., and we are still going through what are now, I think, 450 different court cases as a result. So what we can hope is that these folks that our viewer is seeing in Missouri and in Wisconsin and elsewhere, number one, are on the radar of law enforcement. If you come across someone you believe is planning to do violence, notify local law enforcement, notify the FBI. The FBI is taking this seriously. And number two, for the ones that are determined to do violence, hopefully it just won't be convenient for them to get themselves to Washington, D.C. It's horrible to have to count on that, but to some degree, I think it will be a factor that dissuades some of them as well. So I share the concern with you. At many times in history, even talking about, is it possible that the former president, who has continued to claim he actually won, will lead a riot in the middle of another president's term in order to try to oust that president? In many times in American history, it would be crazy to even bring this up. Sadly, right now, this has changed irreversibly. Because of what happened in January, we now have to take this possibility seriously. And it is a real possibility that they may do more of it. And so we're going to continue following it. We are continuing to see, what is the totality of what we're seeing? We're seeing what Donald Trump is saying, of course. We are starting to see an escalation in the violent rhetoric from simply Republican voters. We are starting to see both online and offline rhetoric become more radical. We are hearing from people coded language like, we're going to get the White House back sooner than you think, when it's like, well, you could get it back in November of 2024. That's the soonest. But they're going beyond that in the way that they're hinting and feinting. So that's FEINT. So unfortunately, I share this concern. I hope that there is no violence in August, but I worry that something is building here. And if so, I do hope law enforcement is aware of it. Speaking of violence, we haven't done this for a while, and I think it's important to do it again. Did you know that there were 10 mass shootings this past weekend? Just this past weekend that finished a couple days ago. The Gun Violence Archive tracks mass shootings, and on June 4th, 5th, and 6th, there were 10 individual shooting incidents in which a minimum of 4 victims were shot, either injured or killed, not including any shooter who may have also been injured or killed during the incident. This is 10 incidents where at least 4 people were killed and or injured. And consider for a second, by this definition of mass shooting, where you need at least 4 injuries or deaths, there were a whole bunch of other incidents with 2 or 3 people being injured and killed. When the baseline is set at 4 injured and killed, we had 10 such incidents this past weekend, and it barely made news. It is just another normal weekend in the United States of America. Some examples. In Portland, Oregon, 4 were killed and 1 were injured at a home. In Indianapolis, Indiana, 2 were killed and 2 were injured, all in the parking lot of a Boston Market restaurant. In North Carolina, 4 people were shot and injured at a party at a trailer park. And I could go through and give you all of the various stories, but you can imagine how all of these or many of these went down. But 10 mass shootings this weekend, and it barely makes news because it has become background noise. That's the tragic reality of the situation. The loss of life, the injury, that's one tragedy. The other tragedy is that this stuff barely even makes the news anymore. Another weekend, another 10 mass shootings. And the number is probably more like 25 if you include those where 2 or 3 people were injured as well. Also, it's embarrassing. It's not just tragic, it's embarrassing. The world looks at us. Clearly, we have the resources for dealing with this. It's not a money issue. We have no shortage of ideas for how to deal with it, even if, without touching the Second Amendment, which we have a Second Amendment, okay. Without even going close to infringing on the Second Amendment. We have so many ideas for things that should be done. Look at what happened on vaccines once we got competent leadership in power in January. We clearly can do things. We clearly can manage big projects. It's not an impossibility. And yet there is simply no political will to deal with this. And it's a global embarrassment, truly. And even if you don't care about gun violence per se, like maybe you don't, do you realize how this makes us look to our adversaries and the ideas that this gives our adversaries? They see another weekend, another 10 mass shootings. What the hell is wrong with these Americans? They are saying, if the US population has been propagandized enough that they won't do anything on guns, if they can't even pass 100% universal background checks when Democrats control the House, Senate, White House, and right after the Sandy Hook shooting. If they can't do that, clearly these are very manipulatable people. This is one of those situations where the world sees the insanity of this. Is this not yet affecting the right people? And that's why nothing is being done? Is the combination of the gun profit lobby, because that's what they are, and the gun nuts, is that combination too powerful to allow anything to be done? My issue isn't even with the firearms necessarily, but it's with American gun culture, lack of screening, lack of enforcement of laws, lack of ongoing training, insurance policies if you own guns, lack of access to mental health treatment, the political movement that fetishizes guns. Yeah, okay, the guns are a problem, but what I mean is it doesn't have to be a problem of guns necessarily. And I'm being careful with the wording here. In our case, it is a problem of guns, but also of all of those other things that I mentioned. And the world sees it, and it's humiliating, it's tragic, it's embarrassing, and there is no, I mean, I wish I had any optimism. I have no optimism. You know, okay, Biden announced some stuff. They're going to be, he is directing the creation of certain groups to look at, okay, it was an effort. But most of that is just, hey, please look into this type stuff. I am not optimistic on this issue at all. If you are, let me know why. Let me know why I should be more optimistic. You can find me on Twitter at Pakman.
What if you could read 10 books in just one sitting? That's exactly what one of my favorite apps lets you do. It's called Blinkist, and what they do is take thousands of popular nonfiction books. They condense them down into text or audio that you can consume in 15 minutes. Blinkist makes sure that you're getting all of the important core insights from each book. So it's perfect for exploring a book you otherwise wouldn't have time for. If there's a full book you're thinking about buying, you can use Blinkist to get a sample first. Just think how much you can enrich yourself by being able to soak up an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way, and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month, and you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video.
All right, so this you have to see. As if things couldn't get any worse for Rudy Giuliani, he has now been completely exposed by some newly released audio recordings in which he just straight up calls Ukraine and says, hey, here's what we need you to say about investigating Joe Biden. And this goes back, of course, to Donald Trump's supposedly perfect phone call with Ukraine and the entire impeachment fiasco. Rudy's house has been searched. Rudy's office has been searched. Rudy farted multiple times during that bogus voter fraud hearing in Michigan, or who knows where that one was. Rudy represented the most pathetic failure of a president in the modern political era. And now caught on audio recordings, it just won't stop. This is new content, and Rudy is potentially in some really serious trouble here. So let's listen to the first clip. There's something notable here. There's an important detail, which is actually a theme of these clips, which we suspected before. So see if you can spot it on this first time through.
And all we need from the president is to say, I'm going to put an honest prosecutor in charge. He's going to investigate and dig up the evidence that presently exists, and is there any other evidence about involvement of the 2016 election. And then the Biden thing has to be run out. I don't know if it's true or not. I mean, I see him bragging about it on television. And to me as a lawyer, it sounds like a bribe.
Did you notice that Rudy keeps saying, we need him to say we are investigating Biden? This is not Rudy wanting justice done. He doesn't actually say, we need the investigation to be done. He insists that they need the investigation announced. And we had a sense that this was the case from what we knew before. Remember, our understanding before, we didn't have recordings, but our understanding before was they were asking for the announcement of an investigation. They didn't really care about the investigation itself because they wanted the propaganda value to say, look, Ukraine has just announced an investigation. Whether it took place or not, it didn't even really matter. It wasn't about proving Joe Biden did anything or Hunter Biden did anything. It was about claiming they are doing an investigation, period. Joe Biden is under investigation is what they wanted from a propaganda perspective. And there's more of that phraseology in this next segment. Let's check it out and listen to the exact same thing.
If he could make some statement at the right time that he supports a fair, honest law enforcement system and that these investigations go wherever they have to go, going to be run by honest people, that would clear the air really well.
So there it is again. If he could make some statements at the right time. Justice has no right time, Rudy. Come on. But Rudy doesn't care about justice. And Rudy doesn't care about finding out what happened. That's not what this was about. This was Rudy and Trump deciding we want an announcement that there's an investigation into Joe Biden at a time that is politically suitable, meaning suitable for Trump in trying to get himself reelected against who he imagined would be his opponent, Joe Biden. Let's listen to the last bit here, and here you actually get the offer of the quid pro quo. It's stunning that it's all on tape, guys. We have the recordings now. Here is the quid pro quo offer.
And I think it would make it possible for me to come and make it possible, I think, for me to talk to the president and see what I can do about making sure that whatever misunderstandings are put aside. And maybe even, I kind of think that this could be a good thing for having a much better relationship where we really understand each other.
So there's the closing of the circle on the quid pro quo. If you announce these investigations into Joe Biden, not even if you do them, if you announce the investigations into Joe Biden, then I can talk to Trump and we can resolve all of those misunderstandings. This is gangster code. This is mafia code, right? This is, you never fully say it, but you say, hey, you know our problem? I think if you were able to cut me in as a partner on this business, which means give me some money so I don't rip your, whatever off. If you could make me a partner in this enterprise, I think I'd be able to go and talk to you-know-who, and we could really come to an understanding about what are you talking about? That is the language that Rudy is using here. We could resolve the misunderstanding by me talking to Trump. I'll talk to Trump and it's all going to be resolved, meaning I will get the messages you want over to Trump and we can deal with sanctions. We can get you the military aid, whatever you want. Our problems, we're going to be able to solve them if these investigations are announced into Joe Biden. It's almost identical to, I need you to do us a favor, though. I need you to, from the perfect phone call, I need you to do us a favor, though. They were working for that favor among multiple angles. And we now have the latest bit of it, which is Rudy on tape asking for it. When does it become treason? For the personal lawyer to the president of the United States, then sitting president, to offer favors to other countries in exchange for favorable public announcements to help that sitting president in his ongoing re-election campaign. At some point, don't we have to start using that term? Stunning and disgusting stuff. Doesn't look good for Rudy. Donald Trump is continuing his media tour meanwhile, and he somehow ended up on the Stuart Varney show on the Fox Business channel. Fox Business is like the lower-rated counterpart to Fox News. Stuart Varney is, I won't even say much about him. Stuart Varney is a guy who in this interview allows Donald Trump to just say whatever the hell he wants, even obvious lies, and get away with it with no pushback. And Stuart Varney, he loves bringing on Richard Wolff, economist Richard Wolff, friend of our show, my former professor. Varney will bring on Richard Wolff and argue with him. If Wolff says the sky is blue, Stuart Varney's going to argue with him. And Trump comes in and he talks about ballot dumps from Mark Zuckerberg. He talks about how he won the election. And here is a brilliant idea from Trump during this interview. You want to stop cyber attacks, Stuart? Stop using computers. Hell, Trump has no idea how to use one. Do we even really need computers? This is the suggestion of the former president. Take a look.
Well, that's here to stay, according to the Commerce Secretary. How do we stop it? I mean, the Commerce Secretary says, well, the companies should take action.
Go back to a much more old-fashioned form of accounting and things. You know, I have a son who's so good with computers. He's a young person, and, I mean, he can make these things sing. And when you put everything on internet and on all of these machines, you never see a piece of paper. I really think you have to go back to a different form of accounting, a different form of compiling information, because anybody can break in. I mean, I see young people, they can't walk without computers. That what they can do with them is incredible. I'm witness to it because as a young person, my 15-year-old son is, you know, he's just a genius with this stuff. And you have people that are going to break into systems. I think you have to go back and you have to be much more reliant. There has to be much better security. And the kind of information they're getting is mind-boggling.
He simply can't avoid mentioning that Barron knows how to use computers anytime he talks about cyber attacks. Trump is such a Luddite when it comes to computers that he's always, if computers are mentioned, you should see what my 15-year-old son is doing with them. But listen to the suggestion. How do you deal with cyber threats? Just get everything off the internet. Stop using computers. He sounds like an out-of-touch old guy who just refuses to accept modern technology. It's stunning. And Stuart Varney just accepts it. He says, well, that could take some time. But he's basically accepting it. How is that a solution anybody could take seriously even for a second? Then Trump moves on to pushing the completely baseless conspiracy theory that U.S. COVID cases and deaths were falsely overcounted to make him look bad. We're going back to May of 2020, my friends. The truth is the opposite. Cases and deaths are undercounted, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But here is Trump, Stuart Varney, like a doormat. He offers no pushback whatsoever.
We are in a position, a lot of people that have had COVID, and, you know, I think you had reported numbers far greater than the actual numbers. A person that I know just told me his father died. I said, oh, that's too bad. What happened? It was a heart attack. But they put down COVID. And I said, what do you mean it was a heart attack? Did he have COVID? No, he didn't have COVID. They put down COVID. So many deaths are reported. This whole thing is, whether it was election fraud or other frauds, but, you know, there are many, many more cases than if you take a look, and I'm sure you've heard this. You're a professional, to put it mildly. But this was just an interesting conversation I had with somebody that I barely know. And they said it was COVID. But I've heard that many times before, many, many times before.
Is it over in America now?
So there it is. Somebody Trump barely knows mentioned this to him. This is how many times has this been debunked? This goes back to May of 2020. We are undercounting COVID cases and deaths. First of all, before testing was ramped up, there were tons of cases. My girlfriend and I think we may have had this when we were in Europe very, very early in 2020. There was no testing. So there are likely hundreds of thousands, if not millions of cases that were never captured because there wasn't enough testing at one point in time. Then, asymptomatic cases. There were tons of asymptomatic cases, which still could have been transmitting. People never thought to go and get a test. There were lots of people who had cold-like or flu-like symptoms and just didn't feel sick enough to even go and get treatment or seek medical advice. They were never tested. The real number of COVID cases in the US is likely 2 to 3 times the official rate. And then as far as deaths go, there were many deaths we know, particularly early on. No autopsies were done. There was no posthumous COVID testing. There were people who died at home who were never tested. So the real numbers are much higher than the official numbers, not lower. But Varney doesn't care. He's going to let Trump say whatever he wants. And then now here is the really big lie, that Donald Trump won in 2020, no pushback from Stuart Varney, and Trump raises stuff now about lockboxes with dumps, ballot dumps, that is, Trump's a weird guy, but he meant ballot dumps, controlled by Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook. I mean, it's all crazy. Take a look at this.
Powerful. I got 75 million votes, which is more than any sitting president ever got. I won the election, but they cheated. And by the way, Facebook and Zuckerberg, with the $500 million worth of phony lockboxes that he put on, some of them had 96% Biden votes in them, 96%. They were like just dumping ballots. It was a phony deal.
So that's new to me. I hadn't heard that before. Phony Zuckerberg, Facebook lockboxes with ballot dumps inside of them. It's something else. And it's just out of this world, disconnected from reality. And Varney just watches it all. He has nothing to say about it. At some point, it would be amazing if one of these Fox hosts or Newsmax or whoever, if they had the guts to simply say, Mr. President, sir, you will not stop spreading corrosive lies. You incited the January 6th riots. You seem desperate to do it again. Not on my show, Mr. President. What would happen if a Fox reporter did that? They'd probably be fired, but wouldn't it be worth it? It would be seen as heroic, not just by much of the United States, but by most of the world. It would go giga-viral instantly. It would, if someone really let Trump have it during one of these interviews. Instead, Stuart Varney is like a clock on the wall, just silent. He's like a doormat. Trump's walking all over him. I get it. Varney has producers. He wants his job. He was told, do the interview in this way. Okay, I'm not saying that this was exactly the right moment, and I'm not saying that there wouldn't have been consequences. But if someone like Varney had the guts to just do it, say, Mr. President, this ends today. You will stop spreading these corrosive lies that led to that violent insurrection. You lost and you can't admit it. If it were actually live and you know that it would get out there, that would really be something else. I encourage any one of these reporters to think about it. Think about what you're doing for your legacy by allowing Trump to do what he did to Stuart Varney versus what you could actually do if you stand up to him and have the guts to do it. Just a thought. Just a thought. Make sure you're subscribed to our new YouTube channel. We have a completely separate YouTube channel, Pakman Live. You can find it at davidpakman.com/Pakman Live. Clips from the live streams. If you don't often catch the live streams, we're taking the best pieces, the best elements of the live streams and putting them on the second YouTube channel. We are heading towards our first 5,000 subscribers, and you can find it at davidpakman.com/Pakman Live. And for more on the Varney interview, make sure you're following us on Instagram. David Pakman Show, all one word, on Instagram. We'll take a quick break. I will be speaking with Professor Olivier Sibony coming up next. A very interesting conversation, I'm sure, and then much more after that.
Don't forget that the best way to support the David Pakman Show is by becoming a member, which gives you access to the daily bonus show, the regular show with no commercials. You also get access to our entire archive of every episode dating back a really long time, and plenty of other awesome membership perks. Go to joinpakman.com and use the coupon code BETTER21 for a huge discount. Joinpakman.com.
It is my pleasure today to welcome to the program Professor Olivier Sibony at HEC Paris, as well as co-author of the book Noise, A Flaw in Human Judgment, co-written by Daniel Kahneman as well as Cass Sunstein. Cass, a multi-time guest on the program before. Olivier, so great to have you on today.
Thanks for having me.
So maybe to start with, to kind of introduce some of the things we're talking about, many of us can imagine situations in which the inputs seem to be the same. It might be a situation where a patient goes to two different doctors with the same symptoms, or a driver is driving and there is a situation with some pedestrians and vehicles where the circumstances seem to be the same. But there's something we call human judgment that is applied, which sometimes gets each individual to make a different decision, whether it's driving, whether it's about a diagnostic test that a doctor wants to do. In your world, how do you start quantifying this X factor of human judgment and thinking about it in a way that we can start making some observations about it?
let's first start by double-clicking on what you call human judgment here. Because in the examples you've taken, yes, we have human judgment. In some cases, we also have human judgment, but we don't mind variation. So say we are deciding what hotel we prefer in a foreign city or what dish we prefer in the menu. It's fine if you and I disagree, right? That's not something where we expect uniformity. The problem that we've been writing about in Noise is when we have human judgments on which we expect uniformity, on which we think there is a correct answer. For instance, as you said, when a patient is visiting a doctor, the diagnosis should not be a matter of opinion. It should not be a matter of taste or preference. It should be a matter of professional judgment, and we pretty much expect that different doctors would come to the same judgment. And the problem is, quite often, they don't. And that's what we call noise, the unwanted variability in human judgments.
What are the factors what are the categories of factors that can create these differences? I remember reading about, in fact, it may have been a Daniel Kahneman book, now I don't remember offhand, about sentencing in criminal cases and how one factor that affected sentencing was, is it close to lunchtime or is it after lunchtime? In other words, how hungry is the judge seemed to play a role in determining a sentence. What category would that type of a judgment discrepancy fall under, and what types of categories are there?
So this category, the example you take here, which is a famous study of judicial decisions, is what we call occasion noise. Occasion noise is the fact that the same people looking at the same facts on two different occasions will sometimes not have exactly the same judgment. So a judge looking at the same defendant tried for the same case before lunch or after lunch will not have exactly the same judgment. And by the way, this is true also of factors such as the temperature, whether the weather is sunny or rainy, whether the judge's favorite football team won or lost the game the previous day, and whether the previous cases that the judge looked at were favorable or unfavorable. So there are a lot of factors that are going to influence a judge that are completely extraneous to the case, that should have nothing to do with the case but influence it. That's what we call occasion noise. It's variation within the person. And we can all feel this when we know, oh, I made that decision because I was in a bad mood. If I think back on it, I would have made a different decision now that I'm in a good mood, right? That's fairly intuitive. We're aware of that. We probably underestimate it, but we're aware of it. That's one of the categories.
Can you give us some of the other categories?
Sure. So another category, which is relatively easy to wrap your mind around, is, if you take again the example of judges, that people have different average levels of severity. So some judges are going to be tough, hanging judges. Other judges are going to be more lenient. They are, the bleeding heart judges who feel for the defendant. If you give these two judges the same 20 different cases, of course, each of the 20 cases is different, but the average sentence that the bleeding heart judge gives is going to be a lot less than the average sentence that the heart judge gives. That's what we call level noise. And then there is a third category, which is a bit harder to wrap your mind around, but which is actually the most important one. And it's easy to see if you think again of the judges. Take these two judges, the lenient one and the tough one. Not only do they disagree on the average level of their sentences, they're also going to disagree on each case. If you ask them to rank the cases from the worst case to the least severely punishable case, they're not going to agree on the ranking, because basically they have different tastes. They are different individuals, they have different life experiences, they have different preferences, they may have different political opinions. Basically, they see different things in the cases that they look at. They have different patterns of judgment. And that's what we call pattern noise. So we have occasion noise, we have level noise, we have pattern noise. When you put all those things together, you have a lot of reasons for judgments that should be identical, ideally, to in fact differ and differ quite a bit.
So there are people who are maybe technocratic by nature who, when you present this to them, they would come up with a solution maybe when it comes to the sentencing question, or maybe when it comes to when a patient comes in with certain complaints, what's the path of testing that should be done, where they would essentially say, we need to eliminate some of this variability. We will use a computer program of some kind, artificial intelligence. We put in the inputs and it tells us this person should get 7 years in prison. And everybody gets 7 years in prison. Or this patient should get the CAT scan, this one should not. That would be one approach to this. Does that account for the true nature of complexity with many of these situations? Or would that solution leave something out that's important?
Well, there is a difficult trade-off to make here. What is guaranteed is that if you do what you've just described, you will eliminate the noise.
Yes.
Because whatever system, whatever rule, whatever algorithm, whatever formula you put in place is going to be noise-free. And that's why it's often, when you actually measure the performance of algorithms and rules and so on, it's often quite good. Because it eliminates the noise, the level noise, the occasion noise, the pattern noise, it basically makes sure that when you have the same inputs, you will have the same outputs. Now, does that necessarily make rules and algorithms a good thing? No, because noise is not the only way you can be wrong. You can also have bias. So suppose, to take an extreme but not completely crazy case, that you have a rule that says anyone who's been sentenced of this particular crime gets exactly this punishment. Or anyone who's been sentenced 3 times of a felony goes to jail for life. Three strikes and you're out.
Yes.
Well, you've eliminated noise there, at least if you apply the rule. But a lot of people would say you've created another form of error, which is a form of bias, which is that you are giving too severe a sentence to a lot of people who would not deserve that sentence. Yes, you've eliminated the unwanted variability between people who have committed the same 3 crimes, but you've added a lot of bias in the form of unwanted severity against people who have committed 3 not so bad crimes. So there's a trade-off between how accurate and how unbiased an algorithm or a rule can be, and the fact that it will be noise-free. Because that trade-off is a difficult one, there's going to be lots of cases where, in fact, you will have to continue to resort to human judgment. You cannot replace it with a rule, and therefore you need to try to make it better, less noisy, without eliminating the human component.
Where biases affect human judgment, sometimes it has been argued that being aware of these biases can help mitigate their impact. So whether it's availability bias or whether it's confirmation bias, that understanding that this is something that might impact our judgment helps us to reduce it. When it comes to noise, is awareness also useful in mitigating it in an individual, or is it less useful?
So first of all, for bias, there isn't actually a lot of evidence that simply being aware of biases is an effective, lasting, sustainable way to reduce your biases. It doesn't work that well. Awareness is good, right? It makes you more careful, but it's not in itself sufficient. For noise, it's even worse.
Okay.
Because here's the problem of noise. You don't know which way it's going to make you go wrong. You don't know of all the possible sources of noise, of everything that affects you in a particular occasion, of all your individual preferences that could be different from somebody else's, of all the factors that can influence you on a particular case. You don't know in what direction it's going to make you go wrong. So you need to actually take a stance that we call decision hygiene. That is a form of prevention against noise without knowing how noise is going to affect you. The reason we call it decision hygiene, which is slightly off-putting, and that's intentional, is that we liken this to washing your hands. When you wash your hands, you don't know what germs you're eliminating. You're not saying, oh, this is the COVID virus, and this is the flu virus, and I've eliminated these 2 particular things.
Right.
And in fact, if you're successful, you will never know what problem you've prevented. But you know that it's good discipline, that it's good practice, that it's good hygiene. Likewise, everything that you do in your decision-making process ahead of the decision, ahead of time, to make your decision process more disciplined is going to improve the quality of your decisions because it's going to make you less noisy.
When it comes to institutions versus individuals, noise at the institutional level sometimes can lead to what some call systemic types of biases. You could imagine how noise and human judgment might lead to racial discrimination in housing decisions, for example, or transportation decisions about where should the stops for the subway line be, which could be influenced by all of these types of factors. Do you approach institutional decision-making noise differently than, for example, a doctor or a driver making a decision about an individual patient, for example?
We actually view the doctor as part of an institution. When you only see one doctor, you will never know if your doctor is noisy. You go to your doctor tells you you have the flu, you go home, you take your medicine, and it gets better or it doesn't get better. You will never know whether another doctor in the same hospital would have told you, no, it's not the flu, it's COVID-19.
Right.
Or it's not the flu, it's something else. So if you think about who should take care of noise, it's actually always the institution. As individuals, we can try to make ourselves more disciplined, but the institution, whether it's the hospital, the justice system, the organization that takes care of hiring individuals, or the company that has a hiring process, all those institutions should try to reduce both the noise and the biases in their decisions. And if they put in place good decision hygiene practices, they will reduce noise. They will also, at the same time, reduce the sorts of systemic biases that you're talking about, because when you put in place good decision practices, you will make your decisions less exposed, less dependent, less sensitive to the biases of individuals.
The last thing I wanted to talk about is whether there are some cases where maybe both noise and bias are good in the sense that they're sort of what makes us uniquely human. And the example that I will give is, as we learn more about autonomous vehicles and the decisions that drivers are sometimes making almost intuitively in a fraction of a second about, for example, merging in a rotary or traffic circle, whether it's the right time or it's not the right time, or about getting through a yellow light or not. This is something that it's really been reduced to. It's happening in a very, very small amount of time. And we're sort of intuitively considering the position of pedestrians and how far we are from the light. In some of these cases, there will be variability, but it seems that it's actually quite hard to replicate it accurately with an artificial intelligence or with computers. What about those cases where noise seems to be a sort of uniquely human ability to make these judgment calls in a very small amount of time?
So we wouldn't call this noise. We would say that those quick decisions that you're talking about are system one decisions. They are decisions that are made without consciously thinking about what you're doing and that are based on a lot of learning that has taken place. They can be excellent decisions. You can have great instincts if you have been well trained. You can have acquired expertise at something. So if you are a Formula One driver, your instincts to drive a Formula One car are extraordinarily fine-tuned, and you're able to make decisions in a fraction of a second that quite likely would be difficult for a computer to make. Now, is this a case of noise? We wouldn't call this a case of noise in the sense that those decisions are, hypothetically, as you described them, good. They're actually consistent. The expert would make the same decision a lot of times when faced with the same situation. Where we would see noise is when a person making a decision is not consistent, and different people are not consistent with each other in the decisions that they make, and that creates variability. That is not the case in the example you were talking about, where presumably there may be humans who are better than machines, and that will remain the case for a long time in a lot of important decisions.
So it's really a different category altogether.
Yes, and there will be, I don't want to give the impression that machines are the solution to everything, and clearly they aren't, and that's why we're writing this book that actually talks not about how to eliminate human judgment, but how to replace it. There will be lots of decisions that we will want humans to make, either because it's too difficult to have a machine that makes it, or because we don't want the machine to make it in our place, because we care about dealing with a different human being. We want to give people a sense of agency. We want to give people who interact with the decision the dignity of dealing with the human being and not with the machine. There are lots of very valid reasons to retain human judgment And when that is the case, we need to make sure that those judgments, if they cannot be the sort of expert snap-second judgments that you are talking about, that they are made in a considered, careful way so that they are less noisy, more just, and less prone to error.
That makes a lot of sense. We've been speaking about the book Noise, A Flaw in Human Judgment, co-written by Daniel Kahneman, Cass Sunstein, and our guest today, Professor Olivier Sibony. So great having you on. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much, David.
If you value what we do at The David Pakman Show, remember to support us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, where you can get access to behind-the-scenes videos, the Daily Bonus Show, the commercial-free Daily Show, as well as special discounts on merch, including hats, hoodies, mugs, and t-shirts. You can support the show for as little as $2 a month. Check it out at patreon.com/David Pakman Show.
So I was not initially inclined to talk about what's going on with Milo Yiannopoulos, who is now saying he is no longer gay, he's now heterosexual. I wasn't initially going to talk about it, but it's getting enough attention, and I personally had an interaction with Milo a couple of weeks ago, and so I do want to talk a little bit about it today. Now, if you're not familiar with Milo Yiannopoulos, he's a right-wing sort of provocateur who for a long time got plenty of attention because he was a gay conservative. And he liked to say that because he's a gay conservative, the left can't say all the things about him that they would normally say about heterosexual conservatives who are about so-called family values and conservative beliefs and on and on. But ultimately, Milo fell out of favor with the American right wing. He supported Donald Trump. He did all the things that are the right things that he should have been doing. But he fell out of favor with them because some videos came to light in which Milo expressed views about sex with underage people that I won't repeat here. But the comments were concerning even for people on the right who previously supported Milo Yiannopoulos. So Milo sort of disappeared. And there were pieces written about him about how he lost his career and he lost his income and all of these things. And then Milo reappeared not long ago saying he has left homosexuality and he has fixed his life and has had quite literally a sort of come to Jesus moment. Now, the exact wording around this has to be looked at closely. I don't know if Milo is being consistent in terms of is he no longer attracted to men? Or does he simply choose to no longer be romantically involved with men, but he has the attractions? With all of this quitting homosexuality stuff, these questions are always there, and the answers are rarely satisfactory. I don't know, and quite frankly, it doesn't matter, because that aspect of the ex-gay thing I'm pretty sick of. But I'm going to play a clip where Milo showed up on True News, not a program I'm familiar with, that's TRU, True News. And he said that as soon as he became ex-gay, dogs stopped barking at him, which he believes is a sign from God. Let's take a look.
When I made my announcement, the first thing that happened, which will make you laugh, but it's true, is dogs stopped barking at me. I am one of those people. Everyone's got that friend that dogs always go nuts around. You're familiar with this, right? You got pets?
Yes.
Yeah. Right. There's always somebody that dogs.
My dog doesn't bark at you.
I
keep my dog in the.
Me.
But
That's
dog
crazy.
barked at you, but that's okay. He barks. He barks at people.
You must have some work left to do.
But he didn't bark at Milo. That is true.
But I was always one of those. I know this sounds so stupid, but this is just how I think that God reveals Himself to us. Right. This is just my experience of it. I was somebody who invariably, without exception, always used to make dogs go crazy. So we have a friend who's a political candidate down here, right? And her campaign manager has two of these little yappy dogs, and they would not stop. I couldn't be in her house for more than 20 minutes because it would drive everybody crazy. Even growing up, we had Alsatians, we had Black Labradors. They just didn't like me at all. The dogs don't bark at me anymore, and it happened almost overnight. Now they seem to quite like me. And it sounds like it's the stupidest thing in the world.
So there's a lot there. And I don't know if other people have noticed this, but there's this thing where when you're on a show like this, where I guess the hosts are devout Christians or whatever, no matter how one says God revealed Himself to them, no matter how stupid or bizarre, they always accept it and they nod and they say, yeah. Milo says, this might sound stupid, but I believe God revealed himself to me and is sending me the message that I was right to quit homosexuality by making dogs no longer bark at me. Oh, that's great. That's, God reveals himself to us in different ways. Actually, that's idiotic. That's absolutely ridiculous. Why would God communicate in that way? It makes no sense. Oh, well, but God works in mysterious ways, like through dog barks. Oh, okay. Well, then I guess that we can't touch that. It's an unassailable comment then. Now, my real concern here is two different things. First of all, the damage that this ex-gay quitting homosexuality stuff can do to young LGBT individuals who might see this or hear about Milo quit being gay as if it's like a hobby and thinking that that's something they could do or something that they should do. Everything we know is that not living as oneself is not a good thing emotionally. And seeing this might plant the idea in other people's minds that this is something to be pursued or even to be applauded to what Milo is doing when it's not. The second concern is, remember, Milo was pulled out of the public eye after being shamed for his comments about sex with underage kids. This entire thing to me seems like an attempt to link homosexuality with pedophilia. And that's why all these shows are having Milo on to cheerlead what he's doing. Because remember, here, what's the framing? The framing is Milo used to be gay, and he was gay when he said this stuff about sex with underage kids. Now he found God. Now he's heterosexual. And so now it helps to distance himself from those things he said. It's a pathetic attempt to link homosexuality and pedophilia, which is another old homophobic trope. So I invited Milo to come on the show to talk about all this. I said, you're welcome to come on. I would love to speak with you about this recent announcement. And he wrote me back and he simply declined. He said he's not interested in that. And based on the shows I've seen him do lately, it seems he's interested in the type of interview he got on True News. That's fine. That's fine. This is not me on a power trip saying, how dare he decline being on my program when we are so much bigger than True News. I understand why he said no to this show. He would actually have to answer, or at least be asked. He wouldn't have to answer. It would be up to him. He would actually be asked real questions on this program. And to me, this seems more than anything else an attempt to regain relevance and get attention once and again. The invitation to Milo remains open. Welcome on the program anytime. Hey, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. It's quite dense. It's worth reading on your own. But ProPublica did a really interesting study of the richest Americans. And what they looked at is how much in taxes the richest Americans paid relative to how much their wealth grew during the same time period. Now, a lot of this has to do with unrealized gains, and I'm going to explain that in a moment. But this is one of the ways in which the rich really benefit, the super, super, super rich. I'm not talking about people who make $500K a year here. I'm talking about the super, super rich. In the United States, when you have an increase in net worth, this could be because you earned money by working, or you might have an increase in net worth because assets you hold increased in value. If you hold a bunch of stocks, $1 million in stocks, and they go up and they're worth $2 million in stocks, your net worth just went up by $1 million. You don't owe any taxes other than on the dividends, depending on what type of account those funds or stocks are held in, right? So, but the gist of it is you don't owe any taxes on that gain of $1 million in net worth until you realize the gain by selling those stocks. So what you've seen over the last, from 2014 to 2018, is that the 25 richest Americans saw their collective net worth go up by $400 billion, but they only paid $13.6 billion in federal income taxes. So that is 3.4%. Now, I know many people are going to say, David, hold on. They didn't have a taxable event. A lot of that growth in net worth came from they held assets and the assets went up in value. If I have a $2 million house and the market explodes and it's worth $4 million, my net worth went up $2 million. I don't owe any taxes on that. Okay, my real estate taxes might go up a little if the assessment goes up, right? There's some details. That's how it works, David. I understand. But the analysis is an interesting one nonetheless, which is when you were already very wealthy, you were able to increase your net worth with very little tax exposure. For the average person, if you make $50,000 a year and you get a raise to $75,000 a year, that's a nice raise. That increase in the net worth you could have by saving your additional salary is going to be dragged down by the fact that you're paying income taxes on that additional salary. So the investigation is an interesting one because it exposes the tax on net worth growth, which is really, really low. Now, am I proposing a particular change in policy as a result of this? No, I have other segments on that. But it's a very interesting way to look at how by not realizing gains and by having assets that grow that are disproportionately already held by the very rich, you can have a net worth grow with extremely low drag from taxes, tax drag as it is often called. And it is another one of the ways in which just increasing income taxes, which is often what the discussion is, it's what we're talking about now with Joe Biden, does very, very little to actually capture the vast majority of the benefit to the ultra, ultra, ultra rich. We're talking about multi-billionaires here. This is a very different thing than someone with a small business like Joe the Plumber's, which supposedly made $250,000 a year, but didn't actually. Very, very different situation. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a really good question about vaccination via voicemail. Listen to this.
Hey, David. I was calling because my mother is a Trumper, and I am a Democrat. I have been vaccinated. My mother refuses to get it. And my question for you is, do you think that if Trump would have won the presidency again and had the opportunity to be on the big stage to brag about it being Trump's vaccine, do you think more Republicans would have been likely to get the vaccine?
Of course. Of course. It is undeniable. If Trump had won and had figured out how to distribute the vaccine the way Joe Biden did, and was presiding over what we are now seeing with the virus, you would see way more Republicans go and get themselves vaccinated. The most anti-COVID vaccine group is Trump supporters. If Trump had won, and then when he got vaccinated in secret on January whatever, Trump had announced it and done it publicly, and continued talking about the vaccine, I did it, I brought you the vaccine, way more Trumpists would have been vaccinated. That doesn't mean that we would be better off with Trump overall, but there is no doubt whatsoever. Excellent, excellent question. You are completely right. We have a great voicemail. We have a great bonus show today. We will talk about the U.S. recovering millions in the crypto ransom that was paid to by Colonial Pipeline. The FBI was able to recover a bunch of it. Very interesting. Republicans are also pledging allegiance to fossil fuels again. And the Supreme Court has ruled against immigrants who are in temporary status seeking green cards right now. Not a good ruling. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. I will see you then. If you are a David Pakman Show member, sign up at joinpakman.com and remember to subscribe free to the new YouTube channel. You can find it at davidpakman.com/PakmanLive.
Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman.